Hi, this is Harold Smith, and this video will share Chuck Swindoll's words spoken to us on the Sea of Galilee as we tied our boats together and we worshiped together on March 6th. Chuck's message begins. Cindy and I often say to one another, who would have guessed that 10 years ago that we would have been here? It is one of those moments that you look back and say, 10 years? How about 2 years ago? Who would have ever thought that I would be here? You've read about it, you've thought about it, and now you are floating on it. The great Sea of Galilee. It isn't that large. Listen to the statistics. It's only 13 and a half miles long, and its widest point excuse me, on the north side is only 7.5 miles wide. To go around the sea, it's about 33 miles. It sets 650 feet below sea level, and its deepest point is around 160 feet deep. Maybe deeper now that there has been a lot of rain in the last number of months, for which the people of Israel are very grateful. So you are seeing it at its peak. Certainly, I've never seen it this high before, but it is not those things that make it stand out. It is what happened here. I always love it when we come to this place because there is no religious shrine stretching over it or in some way turning it into a commercial center. It's just a body of water. It's as it's been for centuries, all the way back. It is just as our Lord made it and planned for it to be. When you go to the story that surrounds it in Mark chapter 6, you read familiar words. The apostles gathered together with Jesus, and they reported to him all that they had done and taught. And he said to them, "Come away by yourselves, and let's rest a while." Isn't it beautiful how he didn't ask for more in their reports? He didn't request statistics. How many responded? How big were the crowds? How were you treated? He saw exhaustion written on their faces, and maybe some consternation, perhaps worry over their families. They had been away from them for some time. We often don't think of that part of their lives. They had left everything to follow him. And reading their hearts as only he could do, he suggested the very best thing. You need some rest. Let's get away to a lonely place. It says, for there were many people, so many they were not able to eat. We've been around a lot of people, but we haven't missed a meal. We have had time to eat, but they didn't. So they were not only exhausted and perhaps troubled and a bit worried over what the future held. I remind you that they had left everything to follow this itinerant preacher who never really spelled out a full agenda. And as each day broke, they just followed him. After a while, having trained them a bit, he felt it was time for them to be on their own. He sent them out 2 by 2s, and they have now come back. And he suggested, because of what they had been through and the things they are feeling and experiencing and what they had gone through, it's time to rest. So they went away in a boat to a lonely place by themselves. Well, guess what? It was on this body of water You know, we have read this all our lives, but now you can just look around and you don't need an imagination. You can see it. You are sitting in a boat that floats on it. And I emphasize that because I want this to be a lasting, memorable moment for you. They weren't on a boat anywhere as large as the one of these boats, just a little sailing, fishing vessel. As they would make their way across the sea to the other side. Now, regrettably, they didn't get to be alone. Their hope was to be alone with him. But the crowds followed. They saw where they were going. They went around the end of the lake, and they were there when the little boat came to a stop. Just for a moment, you who minister to others, and there are a number of you who do, there are times when people can be just so challenging. We love them, and we wouldn't have a ministry without them, but sometimes they are just so omnipresent. They're just always there, and there are always needs. And you know this group has needs. And after all, Jesus represented a free lunch. He's the one to follow. And many of these people were starving, poor, broken, crippled, and needy. As soon as they stepped their sandals off the lake and made their way up to the shoreline, there were the people. So we are not surprised, as the people are, there while these disciples are disembarking. And there was a great multitude, and we read how different Jesus' response is. He felt compassion for them. He never seemed to tire him, and his heart went out to them. They were like sheep without a shepherd. Mark records that right away begins to teach them many things. I'm sure the disciples thought, I thought this was about a place to rest. I thought that we were going to get alone. And here we are again, doing what we've been doing, when it is already quite late. Don't let that escape your mind. The sun is setting. The disciples are weary, hungry, irritated by the presence of so many. The place is desolate, and it is already quite late. And so they said to Jesus, send them away, that they might go into the surrounding countryside and in the village and buy themselves something to eat. He answered and said to them, you give them something to eat. And it is not in the text, but it's between the lines that you got to be kidding. That is my paraphrase. They said to him, shall we spend a year's wages and give them something to eat? We don't have money and we don't have any food. What are you talking about? And he said to them, how many loaves do you have? Go, look around. Reg, our actor who performed earlier, introduces us to the little boy who grew up, who had come to see Jesus. Remember? And he had his lunch. Just a few pieces of flatbread, brittle, and a couple of sardines. Teeny little fish, which was going to be his to munch on, to hold him over until he got back home, and that is what they found. So he said to them, how many loaves do you have there? And they said to him, 5 loaves and 2 little fish. And I'm sure they shrugged their shoulders and said to themselves, what do we do now? Jesus didn't flinch and didn't hesitate. He commanded them all to recline there on the grass, and they reclined in companies of 100, fifties and thousands of them. Excuse me. 5,000 men. They were married, so that's 10,000. And then we have children. It was a massive crowd of people. Excuse me. He took the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes, and looking toward heaven, a great moment, he blessed the food, and he broke the loaves. He kept giving them to the disciples to set before them. He divided up the 2 little fish among them all, and he kept dividing it, and he kept dividing it, and he kept dividing it. And the loaves were stacking up, and the disciples became the ushers, and they walked their way through the crowds, handing out fish and chips. Forget this. Just comes to my mind. You know this is just kind of a snack. No, it's not a snack. Do you want more? There is plenty more. And 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 more and more and more. And the ones handing out the food were busy about the task. And I emphasize task on purpose, to try to make sure everyone gets the bread and fish. Some wanted a second helping and some wanted a third. They provided it. You want more? They got that. And we read he divided up the bread and the fish among them all. And they all ate and were satisfied. They got everything they wanted and more. You might say they were stuffed with their fish and their bread, and they picked up 12 full baskets of the broken pieces and also of the fish. They picked them up. I don't know how that was done. Maybe when they had enough, they just dropped them down, and the disciples came along with baskets they had used to spread the food around, and they started picking up. There was a pile around Jesus' feet, providing more and more and more and more, until there were 12 baskets stuffed with bread and the fish. 1 basket per disciple. Every disciple not only had all he wanted, but had a basket full. They could hardly carry it. There was so much available to each one of them. He knew what he was doing, and by the way, the pieces were all broken from his hands, and were broken pieces of bread filled each basket. I suppose at this time the disciples ate, had all they wanted, so they were stuffed. You know, I love this. Immediately he made his disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side. Okay, guys, on your way. I don't know if they took the baskets with them, or if they left the baskets, or if they even thought about the baskets. They are full, and you know how food looks after you're full. You've got the memory of having so much. I'm emphasizing that for a reason. So they get in the boat. He doesn't get in the boat. As a matter of fact, he deliberately stays there, and he sends the multitudes away, and now they are alone in the little boat. It's now the 3rd watch of the night. The first watch is 6 p.m. till 9 p.m. The second watch was 9 p.m. till midnight, and the third watch was midnight to 3, and the fourth watch was 3 till 6 in the morning. And that sea was wicked. And we read that they are straining at the oars, for the waves and the winds were against them. Upon the 4th hour watch of the night, so between 3 a.m. till 6 in the morning, they had been at this through the night. Now, I don't know if you ever spent much time on boats, but growing up, I was on boats a lot. We had motors on our, and I rarely ever had to row, but when the motor didn't work, I rowed. And there's a whole lot of difference between a motor pushing a boat and oars that you are using. And now most of these were seasoned sailors, and they are convinced they're not going to make it because they have been straining at the oars. The Greek says they were harassed by the waves. Harassed. I like that rendering. And they looked over to the side and they saw Jesus walking on the sea. He walked on water. They were scared spitless. They looked out there and they thought they saw a phantom. The Greek word is phantoso, a phantom, a ghost. Then it dawned on them, no, it's not. They had never seen this before. It wasn't a show. It wasn't a performance. It was a proof that he was the sovereign of the seas. He is the Savior through the storms. You keep that in mind, and he gets on their boat, and they are frightened, and he spoke to them, and he said to them, "Take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid." We just witnessed all the people being filled, and I come to you now. You have me on the boat, and it's not going to sink. With God on the boat, everything is under control. And then, when he got in the boat, the wind stopped, and the waves stopped, and they were greatly astonished. Why in the world would they be so astonished? The one who just fed them more than they could eat, and the thousands of people more than any of them can eat, and he had just walked on the water. One day he would die on a cross, and in years to come, the poet would write that he died upon a cross of wood, yet made the hill on which it stood. He made this sea. He is in control of this sea. He is in control of the storms. Nothing was a mistake or a surprise. But they are astonished when the waves stopped. I'm sure the little boat still rocked, even though the wind was gone and the waves were gone. Fishermen call this a slick, when you can toss a coin in the water and see the ripple. It's almost slick. How could this be? They were astonished. You know what? We're not left to wonder why they didn't get it, because the next verse says, they have not gained any insight from the loaves, for their heart was hardened. That's why I said to remember what I had mentioned earlier about the multiplying of the bread and the multiplying of the fish. They were busily handing it out. They were task-oriented. They had a job to do, and they're going to get it done. They're going to get these people fed and get them out of here. Back years ago, when we would travel with our interns to various churches, it was always interesting to visit churches we had not seen or been to before, in order to find out a lot about the churches when we talked to people like the custodians. And I'd rather talk to a custodian than a pastor of a church, because they know the scoop. This custodian was cleaning up. It was a Monday morning. He was picking up all the bulletins and all the stuff people leave behind. So we struck up a conversation. We said, you've got a really busy church here, don't you? He said, yeah, really busy. We said, how busy? He said, well, we process about 2,500 every Sunday. Process. Process. Are you processing people? If you're task-oriented, you are. If you're busy about the agenda, all you're concerned about is what time is it? What time is dinner? And what's next on the agenda for tomorrow? We're not processing you through this tour. We are acquainting you with the one who is sovereign of the sea. And this is a great way to do it. It's kind of nice that the boat keeps floating. It sort of put them to the test if they leaked. They gained no insight from the loaves and the fish because their heart was hardened. You know that can happen to men and women. They can be so engaged in ministry, plan the music, plan your program, cleaning up the table, making sure the budget fits and works. You wind up paying your bills. You got the right buildings. You got the right number of people. They're in the right place, and on and on and on, task after task. And it's just business as usual. And then something happens, and you're broken. When you're broken, the whole fast factor changes. I'm looking today into the faces of you, some of whom have been broken. Some of you are in the process of being broken, and the storm is now raging on the sea. It's ragging in your life, whatever it may be or whatever, maybe your family, maybe with your mate or your former mate. Or perhaps you have someone after you who's making your life miserable. Or I can name 100 different possibilities. Reach into your purse or pocket and pull out your rock. I've done that with mine. Just pull it out. Hold it in your hand. Hold it right there. It's time to do some reflecting on our lives and do something with this rock. It's not the size of the rock or the color of it. It's not its age or whatever. It's simply you're holding a symbol in your hand, something that represents something far more important. This is a burden. This is a trial. This is something that's breaking you or maybe has broken you. This is an area in your life maybe only you know about, and perhaps they don't need to. I've written a few situations down that these rocks may represent. Just listen and do a little reflecting. Maybe a situation you cannot change that's plaguing you, and you can't get away from it. Even on this tour to Israel, maybe a person you need to forgive, but you can't seem to bring yourself to forgive them, him or her. Maybe a former mate that is really utterly ugly, brutal, or even criminal, someone who has really, really brought pain, and you can't seem to bring yourself to forgive them. So you're dragging that anchor with you. When you wake up in the morning, that person is often the first person you think about. The rock may represent that person. It may be a word. It may be a worry that is honing you that you have not been able to release. You're worried about, and then you fill in the blank. Maybe a decision that you need to make, but you kept putting it off, and it's weighing heavily on you. That rock might represent a decision that you need to make. It's not going to solve itself, and the decision may be very difficult. It may not be easy at all. Maybe it's an addiction you have not yet conquered. Maybe even a secret sin that your partner in life doesn't even know about. I don't know what it could be. An addiction, as addictions are many, privately viewing pornography, and it's just eating your lunch, and you keep returning to it, and you keep hating yourself for it, and you keep saying, I'm going to stop this, and you don't. You'll go back to it. As soon as night falls and you're able to shut your shades and close your door and go back to it. There are millions of sites available designed to bring you down. And maybe an affair. You're carrying on an illicit relationship with somebody, and it's a best kept secret. It will come out, or it will be stopped. Maybe a spirit of bitterness toward someone that's begun to change you. Perhaps a lie you told that haunts you. A dream you keep holding on to, but it's not being fulfilled, and you need to let it go. I hope this list helps. These are just possibilities. Maybe a grief you need to put behind. You've lost her or you've lost him, and they are dead. They're gone. And you've got to yet come to realize that nothing of God dies when a loved one dies. So the death drains you, steals your joy, and maybe that grief. Perhaps a risk you need to take that will be difficult. In a few moments, I'm going to ask you to do something with this rock that you brought with you. I'm going to ask you to bundle up in that rock, whatever it is. Let's do this. Let's not make it 4 things or 6 things or even 2. Let's make it 1. 1 is sufficient that keeps it very simple and memorable. I want you to study the rock with that issue, act or habit that you have, and I want you to release it into the water. I don't want there to be any talking, not a sound, just the sound of the rocks hitting the water. You don't need to throw it unless you want to. There was a guy about 6 feet tall, and he threw his rock about 50 yards. I couldn't bring myself to see anything because I had told everybody to be quiet and reflect. But I thought, what in the world was that? And he said to himself, finally, after he threw that rock in the water, get rid of it. Get rid of it. Just as his rock will sink into these waters, you'll come to terms with what has been for you a hindrance, an obstacle, a battle. Let it go. Let it go. I like our silence to last a full 10 minutes of time. No visiting, no restraint, no sharing, not a sound, not a word, not a song. I want you to be reintroduced to one of the rarest sounds of our time, and that is the sound of silence. During the silence, you and your God can come to terms with whatever that is. After the 10 minutes, we will end the silence with a song, and we'll come back together. Yes, you may need to find your way to the side of the boat. Others are there, and they'll make room for you. It doesn't take any talking. Just find your way to the place where you can drop your rock. Never forget this day. Never. Dear Father, make this time meaningful as we together release the burden that go as a plague. Stop the habit, quit the illicit relationship, give up the worry, turn to you in full trust, leaving it here in this lake for you to take and give us a future now that is freeing, relieving, filled with hope, and a whole new future. Minister deeply. Minister deeply, Lord, in this 10 minutes as we silently come before you. Like the psalmist said, search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and see if there be any way of pain in me. And lead me in thy way everlasting. We give the burden to you now, Lord, in Jesus' name. This concludes our time with Chuck. Have a blessed day.